Hello, I'm Sean Lim, and welcome to After 10. Every year, thousands of North Koreans infected with multidrug-resistant tuberculosis lack the proper medical treatment and attention. On today's After 10, we meet the chairman of the Eugene Bell Foundation to hear about his efforts to bring medical aid to the North. Stay with us. There are currently around 100,000 people living with tuberculosis in North Korea. Most of them have difficulty accessing the treatment they need and eventually die of the disease. Out of the people working to provide medical support for TB patients in the North, one has been making trips there to lend a helping hand since 1995. He is Stephen Linton, chairman of the Eugene Bell Foundation. Linton's family has been engaged in humanitarian work in North Korea for the last 4 generations, and Stephen Linton has promoted business opportunities in North Korea for the last 2 decades. He has also received recognition for his efforts to enhance medical aid work for the North. Meet Stephen Linton, chairman of the Eugene Bell Foundation, and hear more about his efforts to strengthen humanitarian aid to North Korea. Well, Chairman Linton, thank you so much for joining us tonight on After 10.
Sean, it's my pleasure.
Well, I understand that you travel to North Korea frequently. Your last trip was in the fall to treat the tuberculosis crisis there. How big is the tuberculosis problem in North Korea?
Well, it's probably bigger than anyone really realizes. The World Health Organization provides medication for about 100,000 people. This is regular TB medication, 100,000 a year. Those are the people who are officially registered as patients, and they get a 6 to 8 month course of treatment.
So how do you exactly catch tuberculosis?
Tuberculosis is transmitted by air. If I were a TB patient, drinking after me with a glass would not give you TB. You would have to inhale droplets that I coughed up into your lungs. You would get a lesion in your lungs, and then it could move anywhere else in your body.
And from what I understand, this tuberculosis can enter your body through your lungs and hide out for years.
Yes, tuberculosis is a very smart disease. Not only does it adjust to medicine very quickly, it's a bacteria that is very capable of building up resistance to drugs, but it also can kind of go dormant in your system. It thrives in a body that has a weak immune system. If an immune system is really strong, then the TB will sort of just go dormant, and it can go dormant for 10, 15, 20 years. And then when the conditions are right, surprise, surprise, it activates and begins to multiply and spread.
And the multidrug-resistant tuberculosis, that doesn't act in any different way?
No different way. It's just that its DNA has been changed to a way that that particular, whatever drug you're talking about, doesn't work. It doesn't kill it anymore.
And so your work mainly deals with the patients who are resistant to the normal method of treatment of tuberculosis. Tell us about how serious the multidrug-resistant tuberculosis is.
Well, multidrug-resistant TB is TB that has mutated. It has a different DNA structure, and it mutates because it was exposed to regular TB medication, and somehow it didn't kill it. So once you are confirmed multi-drug resistant, you cannot be treated successfully with regular TB medicine, and unless you get multi-drug resistant medication, you're going to die. It may take a year or 6 months or a year or maybe 2 years, 3 years, but it's going to get you.
So does North Korea have the proper facilities to deal with the multi-drug resistant tuberculosis?
It does not. It doesn't really even have the capacity to diagnose it. It takes a sophisticated laboratory. They've been working on a lab. It's not quite up to speed yet. Or it takes specialized equipment like a gene expert to identify. They can identify you as being a TB sufferer. They just can't tell whether that TB is regular TB or multi-drug resistant TB. So what they do is they treat you with regular TB medicine, and if you fail this, then they say, oh, you must have multi-drug resistant TB.
And so part of your efforts is to go in there and to help with the diagnosis of the drug-resistant tuberculosis and to help treat it.
Yes, we go in and they prepare, or they get patients who have failed multiple courses of treatment with regular TB medicine, which is very cheap, about $9, $10, maybe $20 per person for 6 months course, and it's very effective. They get these patients, they're failed patients, and they bring them to us. We take a sputum sample, 2 actually. One of them goes to a laboratory in South Korea for confirmation of diagnosis and sensitivity testing. The other goes into a very sophisticated machine that we bring with us, made in the US. It's called a Gene Expert. And within 2 hours, that machine will tell us whether they are resistant to the most important regular TB med. If they are, they're multi-drug resistant.
So then after they get to that point, how do you assist with the curing process?
Well, laboratory costs are really a small part of this. The biggest problem is that there haven't been new TB medicines developed in a long time. There are few coming online, but even the best drugs for TB are 50 years old. And no wonder there's so much resistance to them. Can you imagine using antibiotics that are 50 years old? So what you have to do in TB treatment is to go back in time to medications that were proven to be somewhat effective against TB, but had such horrendous side effects that people wouldn't use them. So we actually have to get 6 different multi-drug resistant medications that are even older than regular TB meds, and develop a program that will keep these people on medicine that will make them sick for 2 years, because that's the only hope they have to live. Is it cheaper? No. Regular TB medicine costs really relatively little. These drugs are 150 times as expensive. So it's a very expensive program, costing about $5,000 for 2 years for one patient.
So it's expensive, it's really hard on the body, but you're throwing almost everything you can at it to treat it. How effective is the medicine?
It's a last chance for these people. Our treatment cure rate is somewhat over 60%. 70 is considered really good for multi-drug resistant TB.
And that compares pretty well to treatment in South Korea for the same disease?
Yes, it does. And the reason why our treatment outcomes are comparable is because we have very few patients who default, who just give up in midstream, whereas in South Korea, MDR patients default at about a rate of 30%.
So in the case of North Korea, you've been treating many patients there, but yet the tide of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis has not gone down. What will it take for it to at least slow the progression?
It takes 2 rails. You have to have a good, solid, regular TB program, but then you have to have a backup rail for the people who fall off of this one. And right now, North Korea has a good, solid, regular TB program, but it doesn't have that second rail, that expensive, difficult, painful, time-consuming second rail for people who fail this one. Therefore, while the total numbers of TB patients may be, in fact, decreasing, the percentage of those people who have multi-drug resistance is increasing.
And so if there was better nutrition or living standards in North Korea, that could also be, what, a third rail?
It helps, but we found in the studies of Russia that when the economy collapsed, TB soared. But when the economy improved, TB didn't go back down. So there's a significant lag in that process. So just eating better is not going to take care of your problem once you really have TB.
So you've been doing aid work here in North Korea for about 2 decades, and you're there to give your time, your resources, and your care, but you've also said that it's a bit challenging to work in North Korea. Why is that?
Well, I think it's probably the toughest place to work. Obviously, the political tensions have a lot to do with it. There's limited opportunities for residency in country. Internal permission to travel to the countryside where these TB centers are located is not easy to obtain. for all the reasons that it's tough because it's North Korea.
So there's a lot of people who are on board, though, with this treatment program. Obviously, if the patients have a very high compliance rate, there are people enforcing the compliance. So the North Korean officials seem to be really receptive or on board with this.
Absolutely. It gets better as time goes on. When we first started multidrug-resistant TB in 2007, we had been doing regular TB for 10 years. When we first started the MDR program, there was a lot of resistance. But because we return every 6 months, we show them the outcome data, we show them what works and what doesn't work. Over the past five years, the cooperation rate has gone way up to where they are really on board now. And I have to say, I'm always impressed with our donors, because we have a matching program. Either people match 1-to-1 or 1-to-2, or they put their money in a pie, in a kitty, and we buy medicine for one person. But the enormous cost of this per person at first was a real concern to me, because I didn't know that we could find donors. But Korean donors, I have to say, must be the most generous donors in the world.
So how do you make the pitch for helping tuberculosis sufferers in North Korea?
Whatever you think about North Korea, there's a person there who has multidrug-resistant TB, and he or she will die unless they get medications. These medications are not available in their society. The international agencies are not doing much about this problem. North-South relations are such that they're not getting aid from South Korea or China. So unless someone is willing to pay the cost for this medication, they're going to die. So it's a pretty cut and dried case, actually.
Is that what was going through your mind when you decided to transition from regular TB to MDR? Like you were the only ones there to step up?
Absolutely. The UN, the World Health Organization, the Global Fund got involved in regular TB in a big way. Why would we want to take donor money and buy regular TB medicine when the North Koreans already had all the regular TB medicine they need? Why not focus on the people who are in the worst shape, people who are not going to survive unless you help them? So to me, it was a very natural move.
And the dollar goes a little bit further with a North Korean patient. From what I understand, you said it's about $5,000 to treat a patient in North Korea, but compared to the U.S., it's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh, yes.
So that same dollar can help more lives.
Yeah, you can treat about 10 times as many patients in North Korea as you can in South Korea with the same money. And you can treat about 50 times as many people in North Korea as you could in the U.S. with the same money.
So you are from the United States, but what drew you to humanitarian work here on the peninsula and in North Korea in particular?
Well, I was a college professor at Columbia University, and I had a Korean background because my parents were Southern Presbyterian missionaries. And when North Korea officially asked for assistance, it looked like an interesting project to try to design a program that would provide good transparency and efficiency and effectiveness. So, Eugene Bell was born out of a research project. And then I thought after a year or two there would be no reason, as long as once you develop a system, then perhaps everybody else would just use that system once you made it public. But instead, people kept sending checks to Eugene Bell. So here I am, going on 15 years later.
So we know you right now from our conversation about Eugene Bell's Foundation's work in treating tuberculosis patients. But what is the big vision and the mission behind your group?
Well, as a Christian, although not a good one, I do think that that helping others certainly is a normal proper human response. There's nothing special about that. This is what you should do. And you know, having had the opportunity to grow up in Korea and speak some Korean, in a sense, and having an interest in North Korea and having studied North Korea in graduate school and whatnot, it was the easier thing for me to do. And as you say, no one else was doing it, so why not? Why not?
So what has changed the most since you've started your operations?
I think North Koreans are certainly far more aware of the outside, the West, than they were when we started in '95. I said 15 years, actually it's been longer than that. There's a growing sophistication in their capacity to understand what's going on in Western-oriented democracies. And I think after lots of exchange, they're willing to trust you more. Certainly our work has changed an enormous amount. When we started TB work in 1997, we've had to work hard just to walk into a hospital or a TB sanitarium.
Took a lot of convincing.
Well,
building trust.
Yeah. But now we're actually enrolling individual patients. So I remember one of the first TB centers we went to, a sanitarium way out in the countryside. I went in and I was talking to the staff and I said, well, let's go see your patients. And so I went through the ward, there were only 15 people. I said, what kind of a center is this with just 15 people? They said, oh, the others didn't want to meet you, so they're up on the hill watching. It's kind of an interesting response, but we don't have, of course, that anymore. People are obviously interested in enrolling in our program, anxious to tell us their problems, anxious to be tested.
And these patients, they come and seek you out directly. They do whatever research they can to find you.
Yeah. North Korea has this massive network of TB sanitarium where people receive long-term care for tuberculosis. It goes back to the late 60s. And normally what happens is today, although most people receive outpatient care, if you have special needs, if your disease is particularly serious or whatever, they will use this network. And so each of these sanitaria has a community of doctors, nurses, caregivers, and then also patients. Some patients go through and they leave once they're cured, but those who are not cured sort of hang around. And so our network of 12 multi-drug-resistant centers is built on this system. So when we go, right out of the woodwork come all the patients who have failed treatment for regular TB. Perhaps they've kept in touch with their doctors. They certainly live in the community, some of them do. So we never run out of patients. In fact, that's the real heartbreaker. We never have enough medicine for everyone.
And when donors do give to your organization, they know exactly who is on the patient list, right? You have this system where you put pictures of the patients on the actual box of medicine and they're holding it. Mm-hmm. The transparency and accountability is quite high.
Well, we are enrolling individual patients. And if you were to, we don't give out all patient information, obviously that's a privacy issue. But if you were to, say, adopt a patient, you would get a picture of that patient. You would know what that patient's name was, at least the name they gave us. And every 6 months, you would get a progress report on this patient's treatment. And if you're fortunate, you would see this patient's face change as the medicine takes hold and they begin to recover. And then we would send you a final picture when they were discharged cured, or the patient might even die. But yes, you would get regular updates on your patient.
And these patients, what kind of feedback do they give to you?
Well, I mean, obviously, there are many different people and there are many different responses, but these are proud people. They don't beg. It's very impressive. They obviously want to be treated, and they're grateful to their donors, which they express in many ways. And even when they fail treatment and know they're going to die, they still thank their donors. So they're pretty impressive people in their own right.
So some people may be opposed to assisting North Korea. What do you say to the critics?
Well, I'm opposed to humanitarian aid programs that are not good. Bad programs are not good for anybody, either the person who gives or the person who receives. But I say, take a look at our program. We're not assisting North Korea as an abstract concept. We're assisting people who happen to be North Koreans, who also happen to have a fatal disease. And when you put it on that terms, you really run out of critics pretty fast, because it's pretty obvious that the assistance we're giving is getting to the patients and is achieving a scientifically verifiable outcome. As long as you can show people that your money actually does something, does what it was intended to do, very few people oppose it.
So you mentioned that there are more patients than you can serve. So obviously that's an area that you would like to grow in. But what are some of the other objectives or future goals that you have?
Eugene Bell is a channel, and we do have foreign donors, largely Korean donors. So in a sense, I don't see Eugene Bell as an entity, but more as a pipeline of assistance that goes largely from the Korean community in Korea and overseas to people in North Korea with specific needs. So it's a connecting pipeline. I don't really have any big dreams for the pipeline. It has to exist as long as there's a need for that pipe. The moment Eugene Bell is no longer needed, when Korean people north and south can connect on their own and they're happy with this arrangement, why would you need a pipe? So I would like to see Eugene Bell go out of business. That would be my
the ultimate marker of success.
Ultimate mark. But until that day, we got to treat one more patient, because epidemiologically speaking, we're not stopping this disease. We're not really hardly slowing it down. TB, multidrug-resistant TB, is well and happy and doing fine in North Korea. If we're going to put a stop to this thing, it's going to have to be by treating a whole lot more patients than we are able to treat today.
Well, Chairman Linton, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this issue, and best of luck.
Thank you very much for your interest, Sean.
And that does it for us tonight on After 10. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next time.